around the world, we now have 41% globally, 41% of women are active researchers. For the STEM to reach parity, so 50%, don't anticipate that would happen until 2052. So there's a whole space for interventions there that you have to be able to understand. It can't be a black box. You have to understand how this data was created. And it's not just a report, which is a moment in time. It's a snapshot. It's actually a data dashboard, a companion dashboard. I am very excited about it because it's a powerful evidence base and it's really equipping decision makers. And we've been doing this again since 2015.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Ylann Schemm, Vice President for Corporate Responsibility at the leading academic publisher Elsevier, home to almost 3,000 academic journals specialising in scientific, technical and medical content, and much more besides. Elsevier describes itself as an information analytics business, so clearly right up our alley in Data Malarkey. Ylann is also Director of the Elsevier Foundation, something that we'll be talking plenty about in our conversation today. We first met almost 20 years ago when Ylann was starting out her journey at Elsevier in the communications team. Generously, she gave me free access to the entire corpus of Elsevier's academic publications, online via its Science Direct portal. And I had the pleasure, and it truly was a pleasure, of seeking out and summarising the most newsworthy articles on sex, drugs, rock and roll, chocolate, and the memory span of goldfish. But that is another story. In the intervening 2 decades, Ylann has been on a remarkable journey with Elsevier, moving from communications to corporate relations, and from there into corporate responsibility. And for more than a decade, she's been a leading figure at the Elsevier Foundation, first as its program director, running the foundation's New Scholars program, designed to expand the participation of women in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and since 2017 as its director. The work that the Foundation does for women in science in terms of participation, gender equity and inclusion is second to none, and I know we'll focus on that in a big way during our discussion. First of all, Ylann, welcome to Data Malarkey.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here, Sam. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
It's great to have you with us. Now, I trust that was a decent summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything you'd like to add, anything I've got wrong?
Well, I would say maybe just to mention that I'm the executive director of the Elsevier Foundation. And I mention that because one of the things I've really sought to do is also ensure that as a team, we're always growing. So we have other directors now on our small team who do incredible work, specialized work. So just to mention that, I do have another role at Elsevier, and it's one that I really treasure. It's serving as the co-chair of the Gender Equity Task Force. And that is really playing a whole role using what I have learned, collaborating with partners on the outside, bringing it back to Elsevier, working with colleagues who are like-minded across the company to move forward gender equity in many different forms. So think of editorial board diversity, think of sex and gender in research, think of thought leadership around gender analytics. So there's a whole piece of work there, which I think I'm well placed to do, given the external hats and the internal embeddedness. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, Sam.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. Well, listen, the three roles there: corporate responsibility, executive director of the foundation, and chair of the Gender Equity Task Force. I scarcely dare ask this question, but before we focus on those roles and maybe the role that data plays within them, and also increasingly AI. I want to start with a question that's designed to get the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about your work. So tell us, if you would, Ylann, how do you spend your time?
Well, I have a very busy day job, as we'll get into, which I love. And I have a big, full family life. I have 3 sons who are now in their teens or early 20s, but all still live at home. My husband is a musician, so it's nonstop piano and trumpet and students and you name it, a dog, a cat in a small apartment with a grand piano. So I would say it's full on at home. It's full on at work. To relax, I walk. I have a rather restless and curious mind, so I love to roam and I love to read and I love to travel. And maybe just to say, I think to give you a little bit of insight where I come from, I I grew up moving. So I think by the time I graduated from high school, I had been in 8 schools in different countries, different states, and different. My mother's Dutch originally. My father's from Montana, so Amsterdam, Montana. So I'm a real hybrid. And when you move so much, you will learn to connect easily with people, but also just be open to many new ideas. And so I think I've built off of that background and eventually turned being a generalist into my strength, because in the course of my work, there are so many subjects that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I love the infinite variety, and I love learning all the time. Sometimes it's a little dizzying, but it's also endlessly fascinating, especially when you're able to make connections across disciplines and sectors.
I completely appreciate that. My wife is an expert and a consultant in academic impact, the real world impact that academic research has beyond articles published and so on. And at the end of a working day, we could often have a discussion over a cup of tea or a glass of wine. And she'll say it was nuclear physics, gender equity, policing strategies. So I completely appreciate that. Can you describe your role at Elsevier and the Elsevier Foundation today, and how you got there from working in communications initially?
Yes, thank you, Sam. What a nice opportunity. I appreciate this. So I came into Elsevier really as a press officer, and I felt a bit like a press release machine, and those who've ever been in that role could appreciate that. And really, I gravitated towards work that I found meaningful. So, for instance, being a corporate relations advisor, working on product or promotion, it just wasn't my thing. What interested me were partnerships, collaborating, co-creating. And so I gravitated more and more to projects that had those opportunities. Sometimes it was just a press release in the beginning, but I was asked if I could start working on the foundation in 2008. And I just seized it with both hands. And, there were hundreds and hundreds of proposals on libraries in developing countries and women scientist partnerships around the world. And I just, sunk my teeth into it. But what I was mindful of was just, I'm quite conscientious. So doing what was expected of me, but carving out time to do what I found was, what was really important, what I thought intrinsically was important. So advancing women in science, development. And so I would say that for many, many years, I operated within Elsevier in a space in communications that I wasn't particularly moving ahead, but I was in that space of, I'd say, benign neglect, where I did my job well, and it was corporate relations, eventually corporate responsibility. And in the scope of that, I had the freedom to develop partnerships. I had the freedom to build, to slowly, kind of brick by brick, be building a whole world. And it was all fine as long as you did your other work. So it was kind of, I was operating in this space. And at the same time, of course, I was raising 3 boys and working full time and all of that. And so I also think as a parent working, as a woman working, there are moments when you can peak, and there are moments when you you just have to put one foot in front of the other. But for years and years, I was building an expertise around advancing women scientists in academia. What could Elsevier do, and also research in developing countries, capacity building. And so I've always had one foot in Elsevier Foundation and one foot within Elsevier, and I've always looked for the synergies between the two. But I would say that there were really pivotal moments, perhaps when Elsevier experienced reputational issues, when there was a kind of moment of looking around and saying, hey, within the company, I didn't know we did all that. Or look at this, and these amazing partnerships and relationships within the foundation. And so it slowly grew it became recognized. And I would say that a watershed moment was really having Kumsal Bayazit, our current CEO, come in because it seemed like certain things that had to be proven quite hard in the past. Why is partnering important? Why corporate responsibility, sustainability? Why invest in these areas when they're not commercial? It was just a given. It was preaching to the choir, or whatever the politically correct expression is for that. It really was a given, and that's a whole other basis to operate from. And so, what I found was that the recognition of the value of the work, of the partnering, of creating these whole communities within the foundation and partnerships for Elsevier, they were recognized, and recognition for me as a professional followed quite quickly then. So, my first 10 years at Elsevier, I really had my nose on. I was working in the trenches, just building the expertise wherever I could, and getting the space to do that, which I would characterize as kind of benign neglect. But there was space to do that, which I think is a real credit to the organization. But it's really in the last few years that I've seen so many areas, sustainability, equity in the global south, the importance of really thinking about what we can do for gender equality within the research ecosystem. So we call it inclusive research, inclusive health. That really has come of age. So the last, I would say, 5-6 years. And that's been really exciting to be part of that journey. And to see a kind of groundswell of other colleagues all contributing, from across the business to these areas. Because I think Elsevier, with its journals, its books, its solutions, its platforms, its AI tools, has an awful lot to offer. We are a major partner in the research and health ecosystems.
I think I know you've got a huge amount of time for your CEO, and she's really kind of empowered and championed. It's really good to hear that. One thing that strikes me, and it strikes me because a recent guest on the podcast is a guy called Sir Simon Baron-Cohen, who is the professor of developmental neuropsychiatry at Cambridge, and he runs the Autism Research Centre, and he has a what he calls a systemizing, empathizing, two-dimensional model of the autistic spectrum. It's not a line for him. It's multi-dimensional, but two dimensions. And indeed, he's done some very interesting work in and around Eindhoven, the kind of IT capital of the Netherlands, and looking at the rates of the kind of Silicon Valley for Europe, home of Philips for many, many years, and so on. He's done some really interesting work there with hundreds of thousands of people looking at the incidence of autistic traits and otherwise. But it strikes me, thinking about, and he talks about systemizing, building systems, so thinking journals, tools, platforms, solutions, AI, and emphasizing as being two critical dimensions in what maybe it would traditionally have been called male and female brains and ways of operating. What it strikes me, kind of the work that you did in this position of benign neglect. I love that description. But the work you did there, developing this center of expertise around inclusivity and inclusive research, kind of harnessing the power of the systems that the company had been building since 1880, has been absolutely fast-tracked by the kind of empathetic realization of your CEO and then growing leaders around. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, it's a beautiful characterization. Absolutely. It's almost like the two forms of intelligence have come together, and so we're seeing an awful lot accelerate. And I think we had past CEOs that were very well-meaning, but the only way they could, for instance, really connect with a subject like gender equity was to think about, well, my daughter has now entered the work system. That was sort of the path in, and she's not having such an easy time. Oh, I didn't realize there was a problem. I don't mean to be too reductive, but it's a completely different ballgame when you're working with a leader who has a deep understanding and then surrounds herself with very talented leaders who understand the issues and the need for a holistic approach to, so it's not the commercial part of the commercial approach is essential. It's the bedrock of a company. But, how do you work with people? How do you listen to them? It's just changed the entire dynamic of Elsevier. And I think of her as a very brilliant and disarming presence, literally disarming, like how really connecting with people. And that ethos, the ethos is spread through the company. So it's, and I, just to mention that my eldest son is on their autism spectrum. And so I appreciated your description. And I think I'm very aware of these different approaches, these different sides to ourselves. And I think empathy is a big driver in the work I do. It's really trying to understand the needs of our partner, which in a good customer relationship is equally important, but trying to really understand what they need, trying to co-create, trying to make something that's bigger than the part, bigger than the different parts, so that rises above. So this is a little vague, and I imagine you want to get into some nitty-gritty details, Sam.
Well, listen. I mean, it's a great discussion. I mean, I know you've talked about partnerships, and I know that you have a long partnership with the charity Sense About Science. Indeed, I had a role in introducing the organisations 20 years ago, and we recently featured Tracy Brown as a guest on Data Malarkey. Indeed, I was at an event that she was talking at only 2 days ago before we record. I've got such a huge amount of respect. I wondered if you could give us, to bring this idea of partnerships to life, if you could give us a couple of examples of the ways in which you've partnered maybe with Sense About Science, and perhaps the Data Science Guide might be a starting point.
Yes. So, Tracy Brown and the Sense About Science organization team, I think of it as an incubator of talent. Because there are always incredible people working there, and when they tend to be PhDs, postdocs, and when they leave, they don't really leave. No one ever really leaves Sense About Science. They go on to create this incredible network that Tracy is able to build on further. So great admiration for a partner that you did indeed introduce us to. I think about 20 years ago. I've been with Elsevier for 19 years. So yes, we have partnered with him on in many areas. Peer review has been a huge one, and really raising and understanding what peer review is beyond some sort of dusty academic thing to really helping the public and policymakers and journalists understand what it's about evidence and how evidence is created. And Sense About Science has been very skilled. Tracy has been very skilled at really unpacking what evidence is for all the different stakeholders. And I would say that is a core strength of theirs, all the different stakeholders. So for instance, the Data Science Guide for Society was a project, it's a project that builds on creating a shared language around data science. And so let me take a step back, because about 7-8 years ago, we had a moment within Elsevier where we were really trying to accelerate what we did as a technology company. And we use technology. I wouldn't say we're a technology company, but we've been working with AI and machine learning products for the last decade. So, we are, it's very much a part of our lifeblood, a part of how we work. And we were communicating that to I was saying to Tracy, we need to evolve our partnering, so maybe less on myth busting with early career researchers, on, talking to policymakers or to companies, and more on, less perhaps right now on peer review, but more on technology. And so what we came out with was this Data Science Guide. And let me just say that with Sense About Science, what they do brilliantly is the consultation. So you've got an end product, and it's a gorgeous guide. It's very useful, but it's really that journey, talking to all the different, the journalists, the policymakers, the researchers, the early career researchers, the leaders, and it coming up with what is the problem. And the problem was that people didn't know how to talk about such a hyped up subject, data science, AI, machine learning. What is the vocabulary? It was also very much of a black box in which key legislation is increasingly being based. And so the guide really has aimed to create a shared language so that everyone knows what kind of questions should you be asking? What do you need to know about how the data was created to really kind of unpack, an understanding of where bias might have crept in. And of course, there's a kind of respect in there too, because nobody wants bias or, nobody wants people disadvantaged. These things kind of creep in. And so, yeah, it was an incredible journey. And I think I would say that there are key learnings coming out of that guide, which could be used across any level, whether you're talking about high school or you're talking about courses for, really upskilling policymakers and so forth. So yes, it's been an essential partnership, and we continue to partner with them. Actually, 2 years ago, we launched a whole report on confidence in research with the Economist Impact in Sense About Science. Tracy was kind of our lead, strategy partner, but really understanding the role of COVID and misinformation and the impact that's had on scientists. And the next step now, after launching that big report, which has fascinating findings, is really how do you equip scientists with confidence in communicating about their research? So it's really creating all these very useful modules, and it will also build on the data science guide. So I would say that Sense About Science is a great example of an organization that we have. There's just great depth in the partnership, and that comes from years and years of conversations and partnering at many different levels within the organization. But Sam, I'm also aware that I haven't told you anything about the Elsevier Foundation. So if you don't mind, I'd like to segue.
You go ahead, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So the Elsevier Foundation has also had a strong focus over the years on technology. Let me say a couple of stats to kind of help you and understand a bit more about it. So it's been going about 19 years, so almost 2 decades. We have had about $1 million and a half per year. So it's targeted funding. I'm always lobbying for more, but what I am able to do is with our 15 to 20 partnerships at any one time, I'm able to reach into the organization and get the access to the content, the data, the analytics, the expertise, the editors, really the PR help, anything I need to support the partnerships. And I'll provide a few examples. But so you have to imagine, so it's a small but very targeted nonprofit, and we sat down and really thought carefully about where we can have the biggest impact. If we're not going to be a huge funder, how can we really? And so we see ourselves as, and we talk to colleagues like Tracy Blom too, many external partners, internal leaders, to try and shape this. But what became very clear is that we are a catalyst. We can play this early stage funding role and help organizations provide that proof of concept. So, they get a chunk of money. It's usually never more than $100,000 a year, between $25,000 and $100,000 a year, but it's enough to kind of get the idea going. And we might do that over a number of years, and then, help them really connect up with bigger funders. And a lot of what we're doing is, so it's focused on inclusive research and inclusive health. And so, for instance, it's underrepresented. It's the underrepresented. It's the underserved. So, for instance, in research, you would be talking about women scientists, scientists in developing countries. A lot of what we do is recognition, which is where Elsevier is incredibly helpful, because we can reach in and really create real spotlights on researchers around the work they're doing as women scientists in working in different SDG fields. We have awards. We put a big kind of show around it. Think of our early career awards for women scientists are kind of a precursor to the L'Oreal Awards. We see it as a sort of pipeline. Many competitions around the Sustainable Development Goals, Chemistry for Climate Action, accelerators. So we work with the Falling Walls Foundation. We bring in 20 talented women, early career women a year at this moment when they're ready to kind of break through in their careers, and they get training throughout the year, 2 big gatherings. They take part in this annual huge conference they have where they end up moderating panels, serving on roundtables, but they also get this recognition and spotlight. And we added a breakthrough award there for women scientists. So it's a whole kind of program, which is really wherever there is need, we come in. But we also do in-kind. So for instance, we worked with the European Women Rectors Association over the last months, and we did 15 podcasts with European women rectors, working at the upper end, the research leader end of women scientists, to create role models at that level too. So they tell their stories, they provide recommendations on how should the European research framework evolve. Just to give you an example, so we're kind of, because we've been going a long time, we've built an expertise in an area. Organizations also come to us and say, would you help out with this? Join us with this podcast series. We've also been working with the gender summits since 2011. So we have a whole partnership with them. And the gender summits it's a fantastic platform led by Elizabeth Politzer, actually a computer scientist. So maybe someone for a future conversation. But the platform is really, I would say it's more a movement, but it's really trying to really embed sex and gender dimension in research. So think of how heart attacks present differently for women, and but also advance women in science. And it brings together many different, stakeholders for dialogue. And we're supporting that discussion and platform, especially as it establishes itself in India. There'll be a gender summit in India next year, in Africa. And so there's a whole kind of, I would say, a collection of, or community of experts and partners that we have worked with over the last 19 years there that we're part of. On the health side, we're really looking a lot to the Global South. So working with organizations like Concern, but also the AIDS Fund, to ensure that youth in Indonesia, for instance, can get access to reproductive care, HIV/AIDS information in a very safe environment. So it's called STEP Digital Care. It goes from a chatbot all the way to a caring, clinician. So there are many different projects, but also working on areas around health equity in the U.S. with historically Black colleges and universities. So it may seem like a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm with too much information and details, but I think if you think of it as 2 pillars, inclusive research, inclusive health, and going where there is, we feel like we, in our small way, can make a kind of targeted contribution and also bring the full weight, of Elsevier's resources to bear. So we have maybe one more example, nursing scholarships at 5 historically Black universities in the U.S., and we're now planning on adding training around nursing and AI to the partnership. So it's not just, writing a check, as the Americans like to say, but really bringing in the knowledge from within Elsevier. And so for every partnership we have in the foundation, we aim to have and really a champion or executive sponsor from within Elsevier to work with us side by side.
From our perspective on the podcast, obviously I'm really interested in companies that make smarter use of data. And you've talked a lot about the resources, the content, the data, the analytics, development of chatbots in that recent example, AI. As AI is I appreciate you say, you've been using AI and machine learning for 10 years. AI did not suddenly burst into life in November 2022. Could you talk a little bit about? I'm conscious. I'm aware that you're using you're actually and have actually been using it deep in the organization. Can you maybe give us a couple of examples about the way that Elsevier is embracing the power of AI to address specifically issues of gender equity in research?
Yes. So because Elsevier has been working with AI and machine learning and data analytics for so long, it meant that, with the breakthrough of ChatGPT, we were very well placed to develop AI around some of our own key solutions. So Scopus AI was launched beginning of the year. And it's, I think what you're seeing there is a solution that it builds on the trusted content of 7,000 publishers. So the numbers are dizzying. It's like 28,000 journals and over 300,000 books. And those are all peer-reviewed resources. So, when you're trying to understand what's happening in a field, you can use Scopus AI, so that what it does is it uses, you can put in keywords you're searching, and it will create a whole kind of map. And that map, it shows you also what's not there. And so, I'm not an expert in the use of Scopus AI or anything like this, but I think it can also show the gaps. And if so there fields that need to be further investigated. So one of the things that we analyzed a few years ago was, if you look at all the SDG research areas, you see that sex and gender is barely integrated in most of them, beyond the usual suspects. So health, yes. Gender equality, yes. But in most of them, sex and gender is barely, so if you think of something like poverty, food security, these are areas that, there's a huge feminization of poverty, of food scarcity, areas that women and children are really, really affected by, and yet the research is not integrating those perspectives. So there's a huge amount of work that has to be done. So I would say we've always used our analytics to discover that. I would also like to make the point that all of our partnerships within the foundation, we're using evidence bases from Elsevier. So maybe, they're not AI, but it's data analytics. So for instance, Elsevier has created a whole series of reports. So everything from the net zero report, looking at, what's happening in the field of clean energy, where are the gaps, what's happening in the global south, who are the big producer, we used this moment when this report was produced, when Elsevier signed the net zero climate pledge, to also add a whole climate lens to our foundation partnerships, launch new ones. But the gender reports is probably one of the biggest ones that we've used as an evidence base for our partnerships around career progression, especially. And we will continue to do that as now we have our newest gender report being launched really very soon in the coming weeks. And there's some very strong steers that come out of that, which we will translate into foundation partnerships. So I've answered your question a little bit. And that is because I do find it quite an intricate question. So I think perhaps I'm not sure that I am best placed to answer that, Sam. I think the jury is still out. I think there is tremendous potential. So perhaps that's something you can pick up with someone like, for instance, Elizabeth Politzer from the Gender Summits or others. But
so it sounds great, and I love the sound of the maps that you can build from your keywords with Scopus AI. What's there, but particularly what's not there. One of my great privileges in taking this sort of Socratic midwifery role that I have, all that I do is I sit here and I ask naive questions, and I learn from people like you who are making smarter use of data. But one of the great joys that I have is being able to join the dots between ridiculously different and diverse roles, and to spot when actually there are incredibly deep similarities. Last year we interviewed probably the finest forensic scientist, certainly living forensic scientist, and possibly one of the finest ever, a woman called Professor Angela Gallup, and she's got a specialization in solving cold cases, not just in the UK but around the world. But many listeners will be familiar both with that podcast, but also with the work she did in the cold cases of the brutal racist murder of Stephen Lawrence and so on in the UK. She wrote a book called When the Dogs Don't Bark, because as a forensic scientist, her view was when the dogs do bark, you know that something's going on. You are perfectly well aware that there's data to discover when the dogs bark. If you find broken glass or footprints or fibers or hair or whatever, or bodily fluids, the dogs are barking. But it's when the dogs don't bark that the uniquely human intelligence, a kind of HI rather than AI, although I'm sure AI can play a role, but the uniquely human intelligence is able to go and say, do you know what, that needs further investigation. And so I have the great privilege of just seeing those dots line up. You say you at the time that we're talking, you have a gender report on the cusp of coming out. Can you tell us a bit more about your gender reports?
Yes. Actually, what I want to emphasize, Sam, is that we have two exciting reports about to come out. And I think it plays to your question about how the two intersect. So we have a big report coming out on AI, which I would love to share with you. And I think would be very worth a further dig with an Elsevier colleague who spearheaded it, but also our gender report. And I just want to give you a sense, when I talk about these gender reports, what do I mean by that? I mean that Elsevier, because of Scopus, so that is a product which basically has a table of content for all indexed research. So think of all the research in the world that's high quality, that's been indexed, and it's giving you, so that's, I think I mentioned before, 7,000 publishers, articles from 27,000 journals and 300,000 books. It's looking at all that research, and it's able to do a kind of meta-analysis through inferred gender. So that means that it uses the methodology. They use a product called NAMSOR, and they're able, in a number of countries, 18 countries, to infer gender. And this methodology has been slowly evolved since 2015, and each time it's evolved in a consultation with the research community. So the first one was in Germany on the German research ecosystem. And, so it's constantly improving. And the latest one, which will come out in a few weeks, and it's called Progress towards Gender Equality in Research and Innovation, a 2024 review. Yes. So what it does is really, so the gender report is looking at something like 17 indicators. So, this might be research output, some of the traditional kind of metrics of research excellence. So, how do people get promotion? So it's through research output, it's citations, it's, sometimes it's also patents, but they've added all these new ones that have never been analyzed before. So SDG research areas, interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, open access, media citations, policy citations, and then looking across all the different disciplines, looking at 4 different age cohorts, and then 18 countries. And so you're able to, and it's not just a report, which is a moment in time, it's a snapshot. It's actually a data dashboard, a companion dashboard, which enables those who love to dig around in data to go in and drill down and be like, okay, what's happening with Japanese senior women researchers working in physics? And then, you can do that for, what about social scientists in the US, early career social scientists? And so there are a whole number of findings that have come out. One of them is that around the world, we now have 41%, globally, 41% of women are active researchers. So that's a really high number. It's grown hugely over the last, this is an analysis of the last 20 years. The last time we did this analysis in 2020, it was, I think, in the 30s. And so we've really, it's moving in the right direction, but you see a huge differential, of course, in the STEM fields. And, for the STEM to reach parity, so 50%, for STEM fields, don't anticipate that would happen until 2052. So there's a whole space for interventions there. That is useful information. One of the big things we also see is that women are very strong in interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity. These are elements that are essential for SDG research, to really, if we're going to produce the kind of research that will actually move the needle on our big global challenges, we need more of this kind of research. And yet it's not I mean, universities have institutes in these areas, but they're not, it doesn't actually relate to any kind of promotion or recognition mechanisms. And so it's kind of a nice to have. And what you're starting to see is there's this huge bucket of contributions that women make that are nice to have, that are not featuring in career progression. And it's a problem. It's really a huge problem. Women are extremely strong in media and policy citations. So those, again, that is all about societal impact, societal readiness. And one of the big findings is that there's a huge issue around the translation of research into innovation. This is not a surprise. I think what is a surprise is just how low the number is. Only 3% of teams applying for patents are women only. And women are in another, I think it's 26% of teams. They're in mixed teams. But you're seeing a huge opportunity. I see a huge opportunity for universities, for funders, for the Elsevier Foundation at its level to do something around, training the translation of research and innovation. How do you apply for a patent? How do you, all of that. So I'm very excited about it because it's a powerful evidence base and it's really equipping decision makers. And we've been doing this again since 2015 with really thoughtful, useful data to make decisions going forward, and to also have dialogue, conversations about what formulates research excellence. What kind of research do we need to meet the future, and how should we be recognizing women's contributions?
You talk with a huge amount of optimism, and you're actually doing something, which and using data to actually do something. Just before we come to a close, I wondered if I guess you've seen plenty, but I wonder if you could give us an example of a misuse of data, maybe an example of a misuse of data that you've observed during your career. I mean, maybe particularly in the area of inclusive research or non-inclusive research, but an area of a misuse of data that you've observed.
I was serving on a panel discussion in the Gender Summit last week. And there was a statistician from UNCTAD, the UN Commission for Trade and Development. And she was sharing this incredible work that they had done in modeling the cost of embedding gender equality, SDG 5, across all of the other SDGs. And the immediate question for everyone was, this could be dangerous information because this could be used to avoid, block, because if you're talking about trillions and trillions, and with this model, and the question was immediately posited: can we have the inverse modeling? Can we know what is the cost of not doing it? So it's not quite the example you asked for, Sam, but I think you can see how easily data can be twisted for the wrong uses. So that really struck me. I want to mention that one of the things Elsevier did a few years ago was to set up a whole kind of responsible AI principles. And this was before the launch of ChatGPT or anything, but it was really because there's been just within our own organization such an explosion of the use of machine learning for products and so forth. And so some of the things, it's kind of 5 points. One of them is, consider real world impact of solutions on people. Take action to prevent any kind of unfair bias. So there's a focus on unfair bias, but also transparency. And that's one of the things that came up in the Sense About Science data guide for society, is the fact that you have to be able to understand, it can't be a black box. You have to understand how this data was created. So there's a commitment to transparency and also accountability through human oversight. I think that's also an essential element if you're not going to go, it's not going to go horribly wrong. And of course, we're respecting privacy and robust data governance. So, we've been through a whole journey ourselves at Elsevier, and how are you going to work with our data and be responsible as we start to launch all of these different AI products. So Scopus AI, I mentioned, there's also Clinical Key AI, which is providing point-of-care data to all those doctors out there, based on trusted information, and there are more to come. So I think perhaps also this is a good question for someone working closely on the AI report. So perhaps, that's worth questioning. I wanted to mention one, at the same time that we were exploring more of a data-focused collaboration sense about science, we were also doing that in the foundation. And so for about 5 years, we worked with DataKind. And DataKind is based in the US and in the UK. They have a big center and a couple of other places around the world. And they work with 8,000 data scientists. And what they try to do is to help nonprofits to evolve the use of data from monitoring and evaluation to predictive analytics, just the way companies do. And so we supported many what they call data dives, a bit like hackathons, where a team would work with many nonprofits and help them try to figure out, how can you better distribute, how can you avoid food waste and better distribute food to all the different shelters, distribution points, and so forth. And the last project we did with them is to pair them with AMRAF, which is a wonderful nonprofit working in Africa for health and health education, healthcare. It's not emergency. It's really kind of building the foundation for healthcare in Africa. And they collect so much data. They're community health workers, they're nurses, they're doctors. But what do they do with it? And so we paired DataKind with AMRAF, and they worked with them for a year, really trying to help them create a whole kind of use case, for instance, around a upskilling platform. And how would you use that? And how could you then evolve that into the kind of services you deliver and the further upskilling? And so I think what's been tricky for us is how deep do you go in that? Are we best placed to do that within the foundation? I think if we did more of that, we would need to have a dedicated colleague who's deeply literate in this area. And we've had advisors, but people have their day jobs as well. And so, I think that's what you see. There's a kind of, within organizations grappling with AI, there's a whole upskilling, massive upskilling that has to happen for everyone to be literate enough and beyond literate, truly proficient in the concepts and language and so forth. So I think we're on that journey.
I think we're on that journey too. I'm inherently optimistic, but some of the drudgery that AI is going to enable us to take out of many of our jobs, my optimism is that will give us the time to be able to properly upskill and embed it. We will see. Listen, that's absolutely fantastic. Such a variety of different things that you do. When I ask how do you spend your time, I wasn't quite aware what I was in for. Finally, Ylann, can you tell us we'll include obviously links to the AI principles and gender report and so on, but where can our listeners, our viewers find out about you and about Elsevier and the foundation online and social media and so
on? Very active on LinkedIn. I think our elsevierfoundation.org is a great site to see what we're all up to. I think those are some of the key areas.
Very good. Very good. We will include links to those and more in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, Ylann. I think it's not only fair to say, it's without doubt true to say, if there were only more people with your approach to using data smarter, there would be a lot less malarkey in the world of inclusive research and gender equity in research, and rather more data-driven common sense. Ylann Schemm, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.